As I told you, the first step is about identifying and defining the research problem. So, which is very important, and I don't think I need to discuss it in detail as it has already been covered. But basically, like I will quickly take you through this. So, you all start by selecting a broad topic area. And this is where like you understand, I'm interested in this area, so I must think about doing a research in this area. So then you conduct a preliminary literature scan or a review, not in detail, but you should understand what has been done before, what has not been done before, and why what has not been studied is interesting or exciting to study as well. And gradually you narrow down your topic and you identify the research gaps. I'm not going to talk to you in detail, which lays you the foundation to formulate your research problem and accordingly to define your research questions and objectives. So in the next step, when it comes to reviewing the literature, so I'm sure you have learned a lot about like how you should conduct a literature review and like, how you should search for relevant literature and how you should screen and select the sources. What are the inclusion and exclusion criteria you might consider in your literature review? And then you should read and evaluate the literature critically, organize the literature, and synthesize. Don't summarize. That's very important. And you need to have a very strong and a solid literature review in your study. And it definitely helps you when it comes to interpreting your findings and based on that when you are to draw conclusions as well. So after that, in your third step, so you're supposed to choose an appropriate research approach and a research design that helps you to address the research problem that you have identified. So once you finalize or once you like determine the research approach to be adopted, research design to be used, so accordingly, you have to define your population and determine whether you need to go for a sample. If it is, so your sampling strategy, sampling technique, sample size, you need to determine that. And then you think about the data collection methods. So accordingly, you have to design the research instruments, determine the most appropriate data analysis techniques to be used to achieve your research objectives. So all these areas you have covered by now, because I saw that in your like thesis mastery program, it was it is a comprehensive program which covers almost all these areas as well. And then you come to collect and analyze data. So this is where you start collecting data. And, like once you collect the data, you have to organize your data. And you need to ensure that your data is, free of like, your data is free of like missing values, outliers. So you need to like go for data cleansing. Data cleaning, it's very important because we always say if you put garbage in, you'll be getting garbage out. So you need to ensure that you have high quality data, which is complete, relevant, up to date. Then only you can depend on the results. Otherwise, if you like include like poor quality data, definitely your findings will be in inferior quality as well. So then you start analyzing the data, meanwhile ensuring the validity and reliability of your findings or the trustworthiness of your findings as well. So by now you have covered almost all these steps in detail. And I was requested to talk to you about interpreting results and how you should draw conclusions based on the results. So let me now focus on the topic that is assigned to me, that's about interpreting results and drawing conclusions. So basically, as you all know, like, I don't know, I'm sure, but you may have heard about this, the IKW hierarchy or the pyramid in research, which starts from data and then information, knowledge, wisdom. So DIKW is an acronym which stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So if you look at in research, as I always highlight, so we do research because we need to create new knowledge. So in our effort to create new knowledge, we have to use data. That maybe, I mean, depending on your, research. Sometimes, I mean, most of the times you have to use primary data, but there are some circumstances you can depend on secondary data. If the secondary data is available and if it is relevant to your purpose, and if you can ensure that it's of high quality, you may be able to use that. Otherwise, most of you might go for primary data collection. So some of you might conduct surveys, some other people might go for observations or interviews, focus group discussions. It depends on your research design and the research approach that you have selected. So however, once you complete the data collection process, so you have data in your hand. So data are the raw facts and figures, and based on data, you can't do anything. It doesn't allow you to make, decisions, or it doesn't allow you to get rich insights. So that is why by starting from data, we gradually move up on this like DIKW hierarchy or the pyramid. In our next step, we process data and we try to derive meaningful information from data. So I just have included few examples for your understanding what I meant by data, information, knowledge, and wisdom in research. So if you are to do a quantitative study, I'm sure like most of you might conduct surveys. When you're conducting surveys, mostly you use either 5-point Likert scale or the 7-point Likert scale to collect it. So that's the data that you have collected. And after that, you process this data, you generate statistical tables, some statistical values, for example, R-squared value, beta value. So these are information. So based on information, you can make decisions. I'm sure by now you may have already discussed about it. Based on the data, you determine whether your hypothesis will be accepted or rejected if it is a quantitative study. So most students, according to my experience, especially with our faculty, most of the undergraduates, so when it comes to them, so most of them find research is challenging and they focuses a lot about data collection and data analysis. They're obsessed with data collection and they think if they can go for a large sample, because as far as I have observed, most of them go for quantitative studies. There are some people who prefer qualitative studies as well. In that case also, they're thinking about how to conduct a quality interview or a focus group discussion. They're focusing on that. And once they complete data collection, they're enthusiastic about data analysis. And once they are done with the data analysis, most of them, now they have information in their hand. So they think they're done with the research. And for most people are once you complete hypothesis testing, so then you're done with your research. But don't forget, there are 2 other steps that we didn't discuss in detail. So this is where the knowledge matters. So it's true that you have to do the analysis, but it's very important for you to interpret your findings. Don't expect the results to speak on behalf of them. It doesn't happen. I'll give you a very simple example. I have seen there are undergraduates mainly. They just show the gender composition of the respondents by using a pie chart. It's just a simple pie chart with just 2 categories, and that's all. No interpretation. So you need to interpret your findings. That's very important. And that reflects your understanding about patterns, relationships. That's very important. And that's what we expect from you. And that's why I was requested to do this session as well. And on top of that, the highest level in this DIKW hierarchy is about wisdom. So you're supposed to generate actionable insights. So how you should apply your knowledge in decision making, which matters a lot. So therefore, like always see the, the real purpose of conducting research. So you're supposed to generate new insights. And you should always think, what is your contribution to new knowledge? Because if you can't like justify, this is how I have contributed to this existing knowledge, and this is my contribution, or this is the novelty of the study. So, like people might argue that you didn't do anything else. So it's like this cannot be considered as a research because it's just reinventing the same thing. So always think about this and understand. True that you need to start with data. You can't omit it at all. You have to start with data, and that's the basic foundation. But on top of that, building on data, you should think about how you should generate information and knowledge and why wisdom matters in research. That's very important. So I hope you're clear about this, and like you're always free to ask questions if you have any questions. Especially like at the end of this session, there will be a Q&A session. So please feel free to ask questions. And then the problem most of the undergraduates, since we are focusing mostly about undergraduates, other research students also warmly welcome, no problem. I have seen most of the time, students find it difficult when it comes to discussing the findings. Because by then, like actually they are like, they have multiple options available. And they, all of them, like they have their research questions, research objectives, and they have completed literature review like to significant extent, and the research methods, and then they have findings. And most of the people find it difficult, like how we should discuss the findings, what we should do, how we should start it. And do we need to refer to literature or the research methods that we have used? How we should align our findings with research questions? I have seen most of the time the students struggle a lot. And let's now talk about it in detail, how you should discuss the research findings. So most of you might also have the same problem by now, because, like most of you might have conducted literature review to some extent, and you may have finalized the research methods to be used. And some of you may have collected data and completed the analysis as well. So you now might struggle. How should I structure the findings? How should I discuss the findings? What sort of a structure that I should use? So let's talk about it in detail. Right. So it's important, like this is a very critical step because you are supposed to interpret your results. That's what I told you. Don't expect the results to speak on behalf of them. It doesn't happen. And I have seen most people like, they just conduct a multiple regression analysis and then they have included the regression output, the model summary table, coefficient table, and then like uh, ANOVA table, but no interpretations at all. So the discussing the findings is very important, and this is a critical step where you're supposed to interpret your results. And not only that, you need to connect them to your research questions and objectives, and also you have to explain their broad implications. So it's challenging, and there are, like certain areas that you have to focus, and how you should arrange the discussion, we need to discuss in detail. And remember, so you have to discuss everything in the sense, the critical findings, but always be concise, brief, and specific. So some students, like if you look at the discussion also, like all the time we ask them like, look, like now we have completed your analysis and you need to interpret your findings. So they just keep on writing the same thing over and over again. So, like that is not what we expect. We expect you to discuss all critical findings. That's very important. But it has to be concise, brief, and specific. So, because of that and my own experience with the research students, I thought in my session today, I should basically focus on discussing with you what are the do's and don'ts that you should do when you're discussing the findings. So this is simply based on my experience, and I have seen like most of the research students, those who do good research, but still find it difficult when it comes to interpreting their findings and how their findings contribute to new knowledge, generate rich insights. They're not in a position to clearly communicate. So that's what I thought, like by using my experience, I should basically discuss with y'all, like what are the things that you should do and what are the things that you should not do when you're discussing the findings. As I told you, discussion need not be lengthy. That's very important. You have to discuss all critical findings, but remember, be concise all the time. We don't look for the length of the discussion that you provide. But what matters a lot is like you have to clearly present your findings, you need to interpret, and you have to critically evaluate the findings. So how we should do that, we'll be talking about it in detail throughout this session with some examples as well. All the time, remember, the length doesn't matter and it's not an important indicator at all. More than that, we expect you to present your findings in brief and concise manner. And most importantly, you need to interpret your findings. What does it mean? That's the most important thing. Even a layman, a person who may not understand the rigorous statistical analysis that you did, or your qualitative analysis methods that you have used, should be able to understand the findings once you interpret it. And then you need to critically evaluate the findings as well. And when you're critically evaluating the findings, interpreting the findings, you have to provide a critical commentary, an interpretation of the results, but not reiteration of the results. That's very important. Please don't try to reiterate the findings over and over again. This is again another issue that I have seen with most of the research students. So every time when I work with them, I always tell, look, you have to interpret your findings. They said, okay, we'll do that. But the next time when I get the discussion, it's about the same thing. They are restating or reiterate the same findings. That's not what I meant by the discussion. That's not what we mean by the discussion. So please do not repeat your results because you have already generated your results. You have already reported it. So now it's your time to interpret your findings. You have to provide a critical commentary. That's very important. And let's see how we should do that and what are the possible options for us to provide a critical commentary when we are interpreting the findings. So, as I always emphasize, when you're discussing the findings, please think about the structure of the discussion, how you should structure the discussion. It matters a lot. Because it's like, as I told you, like some students, what they do is they just restate the findings over and over again, and they want to have a lengthy discussion. And they just believe that if they have a lengthy discussion, that looks fabulous. And it's a good research. Not at all. So rather than that, to the point, you need to write the discussion. It has to be brief, concise. And also the structure of the discussion matters a lot. Always use a coherent and logical structure. It's very important. Because, like when people read your dissertation, people read your work, they should be able to see the flow. The logical flow matters a lot. So always, before you start writing the discussion, please have a sketch. And how you should structure your discussion, it matters a lot. So there are various ways that you can do that. These are just suggestions. I do not want you to follow it as it is, but these are the suggestions that you can consider when you're structuring the discussion section of your dissertation. So most of the time, I have seen the students organize the discussion section of the dissertation according to the research objectives or the hypothesis. So that provides a logical structure to the discussion, because when people read your dissertation, they start from chapter 1. So there they can see your research questions, your research objectives, you have all presented over there. And then in the discussion, they can see the same logical structure follows. And you have interpreted the findings and critically evaluate those findings against your research objectives and hypotheses. That makes sense. And most of the researchers, they follow this structure when they are organizing the discussion section. But as I told you, it's not a must all the time. I can't force you that you have to arrange your discussion according to your research objectives or hypotheses. If you feel like there might be any other logical structure that you can consider, you're free to do that. No problem. As long as if you feel like it's better, if I can organize the discussion in this particular structure and it's a logical structure, please feel free to do that. But all the time, remember that has to make sense and there has to be a clear logical structure as well. Some other alternative structures that you can consider is chronological order. You can, present your discussion starting from the oldest observation, and gradually with the time you proceed in the discussion and you end up the discussion with the most recent finding. So most of the time when people write review papers without collecting empirical data, when that you have identified, so there you can follow the thematic structure, or else probably according to different methodologies that you have used. So that's all fine. I mean, as I told you, always you should have the flexibility. And since you are the person who does the research, you should know what is the most appropriate structure for my study. These are just guidelines that I want to share with you. And I'm sure you can take some insights. And when you're developing your own dissertation work, according to the context and according to your research aim and objectives, you can think, how should I organize the discussion of the findings? And also when you're organizing the discussion of the findings, so basically most of the time, the norm that we use is we discuss from the specific to the general. It's like we try to link our findings to the existing literature and then gradually to theory and then to practice if appropriate. So that's how it happens. So when you're thinking about the broad implications stemming from your findings, so you can think how your findings first fit with the existing literature, whether your findings, complement with the findings that you see in existing literature, or will there be any contrasting point or a contradiction? And then you can gradually narrow it down to a specific theoretical framework that you have used to ground your research, or the theoretical grounding of your research. And if applicable, you can even think about, talking about the implications stemming from your findings to the practitioners as well. Throughout this session, if you listen to this session, you'll be able to see, we'll be talking about each and every section in detail with some examples as well. And this is just again another point that I want to highlight. When you're writing your discussion, so far we were talking about how you should organize or structure the discussion section, and it should provide a critical commentary and interpretation of your findings. You should not reiterate or restate the same finding. And now let's talk about how you should write your discussion. So usually the norm is we use the present tense. For interpreting results, and past tense we usually use for describing what was done or what we did. So that's how we write most of the time. I mean, like when we're discussing the findings, we use the present tense for interpreting the results, and then the past tense is used when you're describing what you did during the research process, what others did by referring to previous literature. So let me show you, there are a few more points to go. Like, as I have highlighted, we are still talking about like how you should discuss the findings, what are the things that you should do, and what are the things that you should not. So when you explain the findings, when you interpret your findings, you need to always interpret the findings and discuss how they align with your initial expectations. Or in case if it is a quantitative study, you may have already formulated your hypothesis. So you can interpret the findings and see whether your findings are like in line or aligned with your initial expectations or the hypothesis. And also at the same time, you need to see how do they relate with existing literature. So most of the students, when we work with research students, I find like this area is quite weak among them. Although they just reiterate the findings over and over again, most of them, they do not discuss how their findings relate with the existing literature. So this is an area where you need to improve. And that's why I need to discuss with you in detail as. So basically, when you're presenting your findings, you need to first present your findings. What are they? And then you need to say whether they support the initial expectations that you had, or probably the hypothesis that you have formulated. So usually, when we are to conduct quantitative studies, we develop hypotheses based on the literature review that we conduct. So we need to understand okay, what are our findings? Do they in line with our expectations or the hypothesis that we have formulated? And then we are going to talk about how do they consistent or fit with the existing literature. So you need to critically evaluate the findings in relation to the previous work of the other researchers. I know it's hard, and most of you do not do that. And that's why I thought I should share some examples with you. So this is just an example of a discussion which I took from a dissertation wrote by one of my students. And I hope you can see the example. Unfortunately, I don't think you're in a position to unmute yourself and engage with me. But I'm sure during the Q&A session, you may have questions. Right. So this is an example that I have taken from a dissertation of a student. And you can see this example. Just look at this example. This is a part of the discussion from that student's work. See, the survey results show that customers like the new product packaging. This is good because it means the marketing team did a great job. Since people liked it, we assume the product will sell more. This shows how important design is. Also, some respondents didn't like the price, but that's okay because they still bought the product. Overall, the data speaks for itself. The company should keep the packaging and not worry about pricing issues too much. This is just an example that I have taken from a dissertation published by a student. And I just want to know your opinion about this discussion. What do you think? Is it a poorly written discussion or a well-organized discussion? I'm sure like now you might have an answer with y'all. Right. So for me, when I look at this discussion, it's like, see, these are the issues that I have identified. You can see this discussion lacks analytical depth. You can see they just talk about like the findings. It's good. But, people might question, how can you say that it's good? Do you have any evidence? The student hasn't used any evidence and it lacks analytical depth. We don't expect you to do research like this. So this is not real research. And even if you look at the paragraph that I have taken, you can see throughout the paragraph, no structure or thematic coherence. That's what I told you. So all the time we say like, please do not reiterate your findings in the discussion. And also like, please don't think about the length of the discussion, be concise. But that doesn't mean you can write everything that you want in a brief and concise manner. No, there has to be a proper structure. If you read out this paragraph, you will see that it talks about different ideas one by one, but you don't see a link in between these ideas. No structure, thematic coherence. And again, you might be able to see that throughout this paragraph, the student hasn't used any reference to theory or literature, which is a major mistake, which is not allowed when it comes to undergraduate or even postgraduate research. The research work, we do not allow something like that. All the time when you write, you have to have evidence. Evidence-based writing is important. And again, you might see that if you look at carefully this discussion, there are unsubstantiated assumptions. These are the assumptions from the researcher, he himself. He says that we assume the product will sell more. Overall, the data speaks for itself. You can't bring your assumptions in when you're discussing the findings. Please don't do that. So most of the time, students just speak to yourself and understand whether you belongs to this category. Most of the time, students, when they write discussion, they do these kind of mistakes. So that's why I thought I must emphasize these mistakes first. So you should not do these mistakes. And let's move to the second example and just have a look. The findings of this study indicate that consumers perceive sustainable brands as more trustworthy and socially responsible, which significantly enhances brand equity. I wanted to emphasize this a lot because most of the time, the students, they try to just restate the same finding over and over again. But as I have emphasized, like discussion matters a lot. When you write a good discussion that demonstrate your critical thinking ability. If you can remember at the beginning, I told you, see, if you can remember at the beginning, I I was talking to you about this DIKW hierarchy in research. Let me go back to this pyramid once again. See, the data is what you have collected. So all of us, whenever we do research, like if you need empirical data, there might be research related to review papers as well. But whenever you need to collect empirical data, you have to collect. And that is your baseline. And once we collect the data, we process the data to make meaningful information, to derive meaningful information from the data. And the knowledge and wisdom is basically you can reflect through your write-up, focusing on the discussion of your findings. So that's very important. So the way that you write the discussion of your findings will reflect your knowledge and wisdom. And if you're thinking about going for a good grade or, publishing your work in a reputed journal, these are the two areas that you have to focus. Data, I don't think it will be a problem. I mean, like you have to collect data, but that doesn't mean whatever the data that you collect, we can consider as it is. Of course, like the validity, reliability matters a lot when you're collecting data. That is true. But, once you collect the data, even deriving information from data will not be that difficult. You can use software, you can get the help of the statistician or the other, people, those are specialized in analysis, you can get their advice and you can derive information. However, the wisdom and knowledge and wisdom will be reflected in the way that you present your findings and also the way that you try to discuss your findings in relation to the theoretical framework that you have used in your study. Or how do you try to interpret your findings by comparing it with the previous work? Will it, complement the existing work, or is there any contradiction? As I told you, if there is a contradiction, meaning that unexpected result, so then you have to even justify, even critically comment why you might end up with such an unexpected result. That matters a lot. So that skill you need to develop by yourself. And that's why I thought I must share a few examples with you. So then I hope these examples that I was talking to you might have been helpful for you when you are to discuss the findings in research. So, right. I just want to ask whether you have questions up to this point. We were talking about how you should discuss the findings, what are the things that you should not do, and what are the things that you should do. As emphasized, please don't try to summarize your findings or the restate your findings. That's not what we expect you to do. Right. So having said that, along with the discussion, I must talk to you, or it's my duty to talk to you about the recommendations. So I'm sure by now all of you know the recommendations, you may have heard about recommendations in research. So we'll talk about recommendations in research now. So if you look at in research, you might have heard about recommendations. And by now, all of you might have a good understanding that based on your findings, you need to derive recommendations. So let's talk about recommendations in detail. If you look at recommendations, they are basically practical suggestions or the actions that you can derive from the study's findings. So it's very important. Remember that these are like practical suggestions or the actions that researchers can derive. And these recommendations should derive based on your findings. That's very important. That's what I told you. The whole like research process is integrated and interlinked. That's very important. Because most of the time I have seen like students, like this is almost the latter part of your work. Usually, like most probably your final chapter, you'll be talking about the concluding remark, conclusion, recommendations, and probably the limitations and future research directions. So in that case, they just keep on writing recommendations that I, sometimes like I'm wondering, those recommendations do not in line with their findings. I mean, like whatever the practical suggestions that you recommend should be in line with your findings, and the people who reads it should understand that this particular, researcher is recommending this based on the finding, based on his or her findings. That's very important. So that consistency and coherence should be there when you're writing the recommendations. And most students, since it appears at the latter part of the dissertation, almost the last chapter of your dissertation, as I told you, the conclusion and recommendation. So they think, this is not important, and that is why it's there in the 5th chapter. But if you look at recommendation play a crucial role, and it guides scholars, researchers, not only that, even the practitioners, uh, like what they should do and like how the findings advance the existing knowledge, existing practices. That's very important. Therefore, you should understand that although the recommendations are presented at the latter part, it's not that important. It also plays a critical importance as well. So if you look at, like, let's now talk about recommendations, the different types of recommendations that you can see in research. So you can see there are like theoretical recommendations, practical recommendations, policy recommendations that we have seen in research. And not only that, even methodological recommendations are also there. So which I have not included here, I'm sorry, like another type is about methodological recommendations as well. Let's now talk about each type, each of these recommendation types in detail as well. So first, I would like to talk to you about theoretical recommendations of a study. So if you look at that's why we all the time say that research is an integrative process. So you need to live with that. And when you reach to the latter part and the moment when you are to write theoretical recommendation, you cannot start thinking about what is the theoretical base of my study, or I don't have any any clear-cut theoretical grounding or theoretical underpinning. You can't do something like that. So if you look at theoretical recommendations, basically, it aims to advance, refine, or existing theories or conceptual frameworks based on studies' findings. So it's like, it has a more broader scope to be played. It's not just about like stating findings. It's not just about like offering concrete evidence-based writer. So it has a more broader role to be played. So we see how the findings of our study helps the researchers to advance, refine, and sometimes challenge existing theories or the conceptual frameworks based on the study's finding. That's very important. So as I told you, when it comes to conducting research, the prime objective behind conducting research is creating new knowledge. That's very important. So when you're to create new knowledge, if someone asks like, what is your contribution to new knowledge? You should be able to defend yourself. That matters a lot. And that's why the theoretical recommendations is very important. But unfortunately, I have seen there are some students who are not very clear about their theoretical underpinning of the study or the theoretical framework that they have used in the study, but they worry when it comes to theoretical recommendations. So it's very difficult. I mean, at this stage, you can't go back and make, you cannot correct that mistake. So if you look at basically, as I told you, theoretical recommendations all the time allow researchers to understand how their findings will advance existing theories. It's like often these theoretical recommendations suggest researchers how the existing theories can be applied or like modified, or sometimes you can expand it to a new context. And there are some circumstances where you try to merge two theories together to give a broader perspective. So that's very important. So you should be able to uh, clearly state the theoretical recommendations stemming from your findings. So the theoretical recommendations are basically highlight areas where the existing theories are incomplete or like have limitations. Because if you look at the existing theories that we have, we can't say that the existing theories that we have are perfect. Although there are existing theories which has been tested a lot by other scholars, they do have some limitations. So by providing theoretical recommendations, you can suggest that your findings will allow future researchers to advance this existing theory or to overcome the weaknesses of this existing theory. That's very important. So if you look at researchers, those are interested in doing research related to technology adoption. I have seen most of the students now think about doing research related to technology adoption. You might have heard about this famous theory, the technology acceptance model. And it was revised and expanded multiple times. Because it's like, once a model or a theory, a conceptual framework is proposed, the other researchers building on that, they conduct research and they understand the existing framework should be further refined or maybe extended to new context, or sometimes they need to incorporate new variables and refine the existing theory as well. And if you look at theoretical recommendations are primarily targeting the academic community, scholars, researchers like you and me. And it focuses on how your study findings contribute to developing new knowledge. And that's very important because as I told you, like if someone asks like why you did research, because you should be able to say that because I wanted to contribute to existing knowledge. Because no one wants to do a research if it has been already done before. Restating the same bill is not what we expect when it comes to conducting research. So in that case, to clearly state the theoretical recommendations of your study, it's always better when you conduct your literature review. You should understand what is the theoretical framework that you use to base your study. Plus, are there any gaps in the existing work? That's important. Because if you look at existing knowledge, we can't say that existing knowledge is complete. So you should know what has been done before by other researchers and what has not been done. And that's a gap which you need to fulfill. That's very important. You should be very clear about that. And that's what I told you. Like, if you can remember, I told you when it comes to like the the research process, if you can remember the first slide that I shared with you. Research process, I can mainly divided it into 5 main categories. And don't think that these, categories are different from one another and they do not relate to one another. Of course they do. And specifically, like, once you identify your problem, to sort out the problem, like you do this research. You design the methodology, you look at the problem and decide, this is the appropriate method that I should use. And then you collect data. So when you collect data and analyze data, you should like interpret your findings by referring to previous work. And you should prove the point that I have extended the previous work. It's like I contributed to creating new knowledge. That's very important. If you haven't done something like that, we can't say that you did a research. So therefore, when it comes to like the discussing your findings and when you offer recommendations based on your findings, when you draw conclusions, so all these inputs matters a lot. So if you have a weak literature review, there are some people I have seen a lot like students give very less weightage for literature. And according to them, it's just a chapter like I can write if you have a weak literature review. So that itself like might be the biggest barrier that you have to face when you're interpreting your findings. And, even when you're to offer the recommendations, you will not be in a position to offer clear recommendations. So be very careful about it. All of these steps are highly integrated and interlinked to one another. So having said that, let me go back to the point that I was talking to you. We were talking about this theoretical recommendations. So this is just an example that I have included. See, the findings suggest that the technology acceptance model may not fully capture consumer behavior in influencer-driven purchasing. Future research should integrate social identity theory to better explain peer influence in digital marketing context. So you can see, as I told you, like, this technology acceptance model is a well-established model. But that doesn't mean that it's a well-established model. Many researchers have used it. That doesn't mean that it's a perfect research. But still, there might be some limitations associated with this research. So you need to understand, like, what are those limitations and how your study will be able to, like, address these voids or the limitations in research, in like theories that matters a lot. So that is what we were talking about, like theoretical, uh, recommendations. And as I have emphasized, be very careful, like to offer solid theoretical recommendations. You have to have a strong theoretical backbone to your study. And it's always, like it will always be a bonus point if you have already identified a theoretical gap in relation to your study. So the theoretical gap, the moment when we talk about theoretical gap, I know that most undergraduates, especially, they do not like that. And they think that it's too much, I will not be able to handle it. But these are basically the deficiencies or the limitations that you have seen. Or might be other scholars were also commenting on that in existing work, existing theories, existing models. So if your findings can contribute to that, to improve the existing theory or to address that vacuum, So you should be able to offer sound theoretical recommendations. So I hope you are clear about theoretical recommendations, and I'm waiting for the Q&A session. So, but till then, I don't have any other option for you to speak to y'all, and you can't unmute yourself and ask questions as well. Right. So now let's talk about practical recommendations. I don't think that I have to explain you a lot about practical recommendations in research. The moment when you read practical recommendations, you understand what it is. So if you look at practical recommendations, so basically, practical recommendations help to translate academic research into usable knowledge for managers, organizations, practitioners, and various other stakeholders, leading to a social and economic impact. So that is very important. Because if you look at, I have seen most students, even sometimes they comment on why we should worry about this academic research. I mean, I'm not going to join academia. I'm not interested in academia. And when we go and work in private sector, we may not need that. I have seen some students with that, understanding. But if you look at, don't think that academic research is all about, theory building. It's theory oriented. But, in your research, you should be able to, based on your findings, you should be able to translate the academic research into useful knowledge for the industry practitioners. So that's very important. And that matters a lot. I mean, so this practical recommendations will allow you to bridge the gap between academic findings and real world applications. That's a misconception that academic research is not important, because academic research and practical or the real world practice is completely different. So by offering practical recommendations based on your findings, it will give you an opportunity to clearly bridge the gap between academic findings and real world applications. So this is where you can offer actionable insights and guidance for the industry practitioners. That is very important. As I told you, by now, you will understand that, you are now at this, wisdom level. So that's very important. So if you look at practical recommendations is very important, and most of the time I have seen students, they offer practical recommendations. Although some of them purposely avoid theoretical recommendations as they are not confident about it, but most students they never avoid practical recommendations. But the issue is most of the things that they recommend for the industry practitioners, managers, or the other stakeholders are based on their understanding, based on their common understanding or the general understanding. That's not allowed. I mean, you need to offer actionable insights for the industry practitioners, the managers, and other stakeholders. But these insights should be these insights should derive directly from your findings. That's very important. And I have included just an example over here. It's companies should implement post-purchase email campaigns to reinforce brand trust. Reinforce brand trust, as the study revealed a positive correlation between follow-up communication and repeat purchase. See, the way they have written it, they recommend. Okay. Companies should implement post-purchase email campaigns to reinforce brand trust. They offer practical guidelines. This is what the companies or the practitioners should do. But they have clearly linked it to the study findings. So that's what it matters a lot. I mean, a person who reads this understand, okay, look, this research is offering practical insights for the industry practitioners, very good. And that directly stems from their findings. See, as the study revealed a positive correlation between follow-up communication and report and like repeat purchase. So that's very important. All the time, like, be focused. And when you offer practical recommendations, don't try to offer practical recommendation based on your general understanding about the topic, which you should not do at all. Because I have seen some students, they were talking about like, service quality, customer satisfaction. And then, like, when they offer practical recommendations, they say, this particular company should conduct rigorous, like, social media marketing campaigns. They have to recruit, like, content writers. The social media, experts or the social media, like, experts should be SEO specialist or the search engine optimization specialist should be recruited. I wonder, like throughout their research, they have never spoken about like social media at all. Nothing has been mentioned about social media or SEO or the role of an SEO specialist in introduction or maybe the literature review or their key findings. They haven't mentioned anything related to that. But when they offer, like suddenly when they offer practical recommendations, they keep on writing. So, I mean, that's based on their general understanding, which you should not. So then that dilutes the quality of the practical recommendations that you offer. And people don't believe because they know that it doesn't come from the research findings itself. As I told you, don't do something like that. And this is a very important section in your dissertation, which allows you to bridge the gap between academic research and the practical insights. And let's talk about like another type of recommendation that you see in research. It's about policy recommendation. So let's talk about it. Policy recommendations in research. I'm sure you may have heard about this term. So let's have a brief chat about this. If you look at policy recommendations in research, it basically talks about using research findings to inform and influence policy decisions. And that is what we call as policy recommendations. It basically focus on using like research findings to influence policy decisions. They basically like, based on the specific findings, based on the findings, the researcher can suggest very specific actions or changes that policymakers can implement. Something like that. As I told you, like it it allows researchers to translate the research findings into practical actions or reforms, or like basically it allows the researchers to use their research findings to inform and influence policymakers to address like public, economic, social, or any other organizational issues that they have to encounter. And remember, these policy recommendations should be very specific. And also that has to be directly coming from your findings as well. So if you look at like, by providing policy like recommendations, definitely like, researchers can make a much more bigger impact at societal level. And if you look at it like, we have seen that researchers in the field of education, healthcare, environmental policy, they do research and they offer very specific guidelines that decision makers should consider. And sometimes like their recommendations might be related to legislative recommendations. It's about like, what are the changes that they may suggest for the existing legal framework or the rules and regulations. And sometimes these recommendations might be related to budgetary conditions or the budgetary recommendations, where like the based on findings, the researchers suggest what sort of changes are needed uh, in the organization, how the optimum resource allocation should be managed. And like, this is just an example. I mean, this is just a policy recommendation that I have taken from like one of the students, like dissertation work. You can see, given the rise in deceptive green marketing practices, which is famously known as greenwashing, regulatory bodies should mandate third-party certification for environmental claims on packaging. See, this is a regulatory recommendation. So what it says is like throughout her research, she was talking about these deceptive green marketing practices or the misleading green marketing practices, which we call as greenwashing. And based on her findings that she says, like the policymakers, the decision makers should not allow everyone to use this green marketing, the term green marketing practice. It should not be loosely interpreted. Rather, there has to be regulatory bodies and they should mandate. Before you using this term called green marketing practices, it's very important for you to like obtain certification. So that's very important. So you can see likewise, based on your research findings, most of you might be able to even uh, develop policy recommendations as I have highlighted, like this policy recommendation should be very specific. And you need to provide the rationale why you're proposing that. And it has to be directly related to your research findings. As I told you, like I was talking to you about different types of recommendations that you can see in research. As I told you, these recommendations should definitely derive from your like findings. That's very important. And having said that, we were talking about like um, three like types of recommendations, uh, which includes like theoretical recommendations, practical recommendations, and policy recommendations. There is another type of recommendation which I will quickly speak to you, which is about methodological recommendation. So I thought that I must not include that. It might be too it might have a big weight on you, but I thought I must briefly talk to you about methodological recommendations as well. So methodological recommendations basically provide guidance on choosing and implementing the research methods. That's important. So they offer like researchers how they should fine tune their research design, sampling or the measurement scales and statistical analysis or any other type of analysis that they undertake to improve the quality and the rigorousness of the study. And that's what we call as like methodological recommendations. And it's very important for the researchers when they are to like make methodological choices in their studies. So that is the other type of the recommendation that I didn't include in your slides. We were talking about theoretical, practical, and policy recommendations in detail. But apart from that, even you can think about methodological recommendations that stems from the research findings that provide guidance on choosing an appropriate research design, research method, how the future researchers can enhance the research design to improve the quality and the rigorousness of the study. So that's about recommendations. And as I told you, it's again a critical component. Don't think that it's in the last chapter. It's because of that, it's not important. It is. And the other thing is, don't use your common understanding or the general knowledge to provide recommendations, especially practical recommendations. All your recommendations should derive directly from your study findings. That's important. And having said that, let's now talk about the conclusion of a research, because it's like, conclusion matters a lot in any academic report, and it plays a significant role in research as well. Let's now talk about like conclusion. So conclusion is the final takeaway message or the final section to the reader that restate the research problem, summarize the key findings, and highlight the broader implications of the study. So that's very important. Like a strong conclusion is a must when it comes to a good dissertation or a high quality dissertation. You should have a strong conclusion. So if you look at it like in a conclusion, when you write the conclusion, so please be very careful, and it has to be brief and concise and should have a proper structure. You can't write like whatever you want, and you can't decide, you can't say that it's just 1 or 2 paragraphs. Why should I worry about it? I can write whatever that comes into my mind. No. So usually like when it comes to structuring the conclusion, so it's about like you have to all the time restate the problem, your research problem, and then you have to briefly summarize the key findings. Remember, even I have included it within parentheses here. It does not mean that a detailed repetition we don't need. And I'm surprising to see sometimes in conclusion, people talk about like the adjusted R square value. We don't need something like that. You have already calculated these values and presented, and like you have like in detail discuss your findings as well. So here, all what you want to do is like you need to briefly summarize your key findings. And then you need to highlight the significance of your findings, why your findings are important. That's very important. I mean, like you need to explain why is this significance. That's what I told you. I mean, like at this stage, you can't straight away say that why this is important. It should come from the beginning. The moment when you identify your research problem, you should know what is already known and what has been done before and what has not been done. And what's the vacuum? And why is it exciting to study? I mean, it allows you to justify the significance of the findings as. And remember, you need to end the conclusion with a strong concluding statement about the novelty or the value of the study. That matters a lot. Although conclusion may be just 1 paragraph or maximum 2 paragraph, I don't know. Mostly I have seen like 1 or 2 paragraphs, but don't underestimate its value. It's a very important point. And like you have to like write it in a structured manner, and a strong conclusion is a must. And having a strong conclusion, it gives the researcher the opportunity to present a final, insightful interpretation of their work. That's very important. I mean, the readers who reads your dissertation finally will understand study's real contribution and its novelty. That's very important. I have seen some, like students, I don't know, like when they justify research problem, they haven't done it properly. And they're not very clear about the research gaps, the need of conducting this study. But finally, when they are to like write the conclusion, they say like, how can I talk about the novelty of the study? Suddenly, at this moment, you can't do. It should come from the beginning. That's very important. As I told you, a conclusion should be a structured write-up, and it should basically focuses on these four main important areas. You have to restate the research problem clearly and briefly summarize the key findings. And remember, it should not be a detailed repetition. And you should highlight the significance of the study. And one last thing that you have to remember when you write the conclusion, if it is a strong conclusion, it should end with a strong concluding statement about the novelty of the study. That's it. This is just a very brief example because, I just want to show you within one slide. Otherwise, if I'm to show you a proper conclusion, it'll take about like 2, 3 PowerPoint slides. And I think it'll be difficult for you to see when I show it in 2, 3 slides separately. So that's why I thought that I should present it as a brief paragraph. I do not say that this is a perfect example, but this is a basic example where you can see the structure that that I was talking to you. See, when you look at the conclusion, it says this study aimed to examine the impact of influencer credibility on consumer trust and purchase intention. It talks about the research problem or the aim of this study. Since they have identified a problem, based on which they have derived the aim of the study. They have clearly emphasized it. And then you have to briefly summarize the key findings, not a detailed repetition. Here you can't see anything related to the findings, statistical values, nothing like that. They just have like summarized the key findings. The findings demonstrate that perceived trustworthiness and expertise significantly enhance consumer trust, which in turn increases purchase intention. And then you need to highlight the significance of the findings, why these findings are significant. These results contribute to the growing literature on digital marketing and offer actionable insights for brand managers aiming to leverage influencer partnerships. So you can understand why this finding is important. And as I told you, finally, you have to end the conclusion with a strong concluding statement. Overall, the study underscores the importance of authenticity in online consumer brand relationships. So I just have included a brief paragraph to show you how you should structure a conclusion. Please note that this is not a perfect example, but I just want to show the four main important points that you should reflect when you write a conclusion. I hope you got the idea. Let's have a look like when it comes to the Q&A session within few minutes down the line. We can definitely go for the Q&A session. So along with this, actually, I was asked to talk to you about limitations of research. I know some students do not like to talk about limitations and they think that if we are to talk about limitations of our study, it implies that we did a mistake or a wrongdoing. Not at all. I mean, if you look at almost all the research that we do are not without limitations. I mean, it's like an inherent feature of research. And we should acknowledge that. I mean, any research, we can't say that it's a perfect research without any limitation. I mean, almost all the research that we do have like limitations which we need to openly accept and acknowledge them. Because if you acknowledge limitations, it shows academic honesty. and help readers understand the scope and context of your study. That's very important. See, it's like, don't think that it's a weakness of your study. I mean, true, it's a weakness, but that doesn't mean that you did a poor research. So I have seen some students, when we talk to them and ask about how about the limitations of your study, they don't like to talk about it a lot. And they think that if I'm to talk about the limitations of the study, that would be a negative point or a negative point for me, which I should not. If you do not acknowledge limitations, it might definitely be a negative point. But acknowledging limitations that demonstrate academic honesty. And also at the same time, it allows readers to understand the scope and the context of the study findings as well. Sorry, I forgot the first part. It's like, as I told you, limitations are basically refer to weaknesses, constraints, or boundaries of the study that may affect the generalizability, validity, and interpretations of the findings, which we need to openly acknowledge. That shows our academic honesty. But if we just neglect and, say, pretend that our research is a perfect research, that will be a disadvantage for your work. So as I told you, like in every research, we encounter limitations. It's like, if you look at it, you should not consider it as something that you should not openly discuss about. And if you are to talk about limitations, I mean, from one study to another study, depending on the nature of your study, the research approach that you have followed, and your sample, the context that you have selected, the limitations will change from one study to another study. But I can talk to you about some of the common types of limitations that we see among most of the scholars. I thought that I must talk to you about common types of limitations that we see among most scholars. And that will allow you to understand what sort of limitations you might have in your study as. So methodological limitations are there, if you look at research methodologies like quantitative approach, qualitative approach, or the deductive, inductive approaches, like they have inherent limitations which you can't overcome at all. I mean, if you look at if you are a person who follows deductive approach, it doesn't allow you to explore the relationships in detail. It's like, you can't understand how different concepts or the variables relate to each other. Like you may not be able to get an in-depth understanding by using deductive research approach. That's the methodological limitation that we need to encounter. I mean, our data collection method, if you are to do a cross-sectional study where you collect data only once, it doesn't allow you to detect changes over time. It's a temporal limitations as well. I mean, it doesn't allow you to detect changes over time. It doesn't allow you to collect data from the same sample for more than twice. It doesn't allow you. And I mean, sometimes due to our time constraints, budgetary constraints, the other resource constraints, we limit our research into a specific country or an industry or a demographic cohort, maybe like only Gen Z or a specific geographical scope. These are contextual limitations. Because it's without which we will not be able to manage the research within the given budget or within the given resources. So these types of limitations are common to most people. I mean, most studies we see contextual limitations are there where they try to restrict to a specific industry or a specific geographical area, country, or a specific demographic cohort like Gen Z, Generation Y, like that. And not only that, even there are theoretical limitations in studies where you focused on a narrower framework, or sometimes omit some variables. You say that I didn't consider these variables, only these variables were considered, only this specific framework was considered in conducting the study. So these are, of course, limitations in your study, which you should acknowledge openly. I mean, acknowledging limitations all the time demonstrate your academic honesty. So having said that, you know, along with the limitations, I'm to talk to you about like future research directions. You can see like limitations and future research directions uh, goes hand in hand. So most of the dissertations you know, we see limitations and future research as a combined section as well. So if you look at like, as I told you, research limitations are weaknesses inherent in a study. I mean, like most of the time, these limitations are outside of the researcher's control, like as I told you, methodological limitations. I mean, deductive approach, you can't control. And there are some cases where we impose limitations due to the budgetary constraints that we have, and which we call as delimitations as well. So based on these limitations, when you look at these limitations, so based on these limitations, you can come up with suggestions for future research. That's possible. I mean, like these limitations definitely provide you an opportunity to guide future researchers if they are to do research in future. These are the areas where they can focus. That's possible because you know that you did a study and you tried your level best to do a rigorous work. But however, there are some limitations. So you need to accept your limitations. By accepting and highlighting those limitations, it allows you to offer, it gives you an opportunity to offer suggestions for future research. If they are to do research in the future, these are the possible avenues that they can think about. So especially like if you have contextual limitations, I believe most of you are going to have that when you are to do research. So in that case, while acknowledging the contextual limitations that you had in your study, you can say the future researchers can think about testing the same model, in different contexts, and they can extend it to different industries or to other demographic cohorts that they have not considered in this study. Even you can suggest like they can go for cross-cultural studies. There are different options available. And like by acknowledging the methodological limitations that you had in your study. As I told you, most people, most researchers, when they are going to conduct research, they have to face like methodological limitations. As I told you, most of the scholars, like they focus on either quantitative or qualitative. So you can suggest like they can go for mixed method studies because we know that quantitative or qualitative itself is not perfect. So rather they can think about going for mixed method studies. And if you did a cross-sectional study, you might have collected data at only one specific point. It doesn't allow you to like detect temporal changes that happens with the time. So, I mean, the future researchers can think about replicating your study in different contexts by using different research methods. They can think about conducting a longitudinal study or using experimental design. These are the possibilities that you can, suggest. So again, like another future research direction that you can suggest is about like introducing new variables or expand theoretical framework. So that relates to the, theoretical limitations that I was talking to you. So mostly when we conduct research, we try to limit the focus of the study to a specific theory, or maybe, you might try to combine two theories, that's all. But where like the future researchers can think about further fine-tuning the theoretical framework of the study. They can, if they want, like they can introduce new variables with a strong rationale. They can do that. And the final suggestion refers to the temporal limitations that I was talking to you. I know that most of you do cross-sectional studies, but there are some cases where like cross-section, I mean, as you can see, technically cross-sectional studies will not allow you to detect temporal changes. But there are some research where you need to know the changes with the time. Temporal changes are needed. So you can see the future researchers can think about conducting a longitudinal study to understand these temporal changes with the time or examine the longitudinal effect. That's very important. So all the time, remember that when you talk about limitations, it's important for you to acknowledge limitations, and along with, by looking at your limitations, you can provide future research directions. So these two sections should ideally be tally with one another, because you provide the future research directions based on the limitations that you have identified. That's important. So this is what I was requested to cover within the today's session. Basically, I was asked to talk to you about like how you should discuss your findings. It's not just about restating findings, as I always emphasize. We do not expect you to do that. You have to interpret your findings and you need to critically assess the findings. We were talking about it. And then I was asked to cover the section on recommendations. If you look at like based on your findings, you should be able to like provide recommendations, practical insights. So we were talking about different types of recommendations that you can derive based on your findings and how you should do that. And finally, I was requested to cover I was requested to talk to you about how you should derive a strong conclusion and mention the limitations of your study based on which you can suggest directions for future research. So those are the areas that I have covered with you today up to this point. Now it's time for the Q&A. I would like to, refer to your questions. It seems there are questions. Let me check. There is a question. Right. It's not a question, actually. It's just a suggestion. I'm looking for your questions. No, it's just a suggestion. Any questions from your side? Anything to be clarified? I'm looking forward to your questions. Just one suggestion as far as I can see. Any questions from your side? Anything to be clarified? I hope they can hear me, Sajid, right?
Yeah, they can hear you.
Okay. Any questions from their side? Anything to be clarified?
They can use only Q&A forum, madam.
All right, okay. Just one suggestion. It's not a question. All right. It's again a suggestion. I'm looking forward to your questions. I thought like the final 10 minutes of my session, I should allocate for your questions. Any questions from the participants? Anything to be clarified from the session that we had? It seems, Sajita, no questions from them, right? Shall
Yeah.
we wait for a few minutes?
Uh,
Will
yeah.
there be any questions from them? No.
Uh, then we can move for the rest of the proceedings, madam.
Okay, right. If
Yes,
they do not have questions, like I thought that the final 10 minutes 10 or the 15 minutes I should allocate for your questions. So, since I do not have questions, I thought that I should wind up the session now. Before I wind up the session, just want to emphasize the important areas of this session. As I told you, like never ever expect the results to speak on behalf of them. It will not happen. So you need to interpret the results, that's important. And along with that, a critical commentary should be provided. So in relation to that, we were talking about the strategies that you should use and like what are the things that you should do and what are the things that you should not do as well. So after that, like it's important for you to provide recommendations based on your findings. Don't underestimate it. It's again another critical area that you should focus. So you have to provide recommendations based on the findings. And like, please don't try to like provide specially. I have seen researchers, they provide practical recommendations based on their industry experience or maybe what they have seen, what they have heard, which you should not do. That definitely dilutes the value of your work. So you should like provide recommendations based on your findings, and by doing so, you can emphasize how your study should contribute to create new knowledge. Theoretical recommendations matters a lot. And that's where you can, like show how your findings contribute to creating new knowledge. And later we discuss about conclusion. Providing a strong conclusion is very important. So when you write the conclusion, it has to be brief, concise, but should follow proper structure. You can't write a vague conclusion, loosely structured. It doesn't add any value. So we were talking about how you should structure the conclusion and how you should present it. And finally, it's very important for us to acknowledge the limitations of our studies and that demonstrate your academic honesty. And on the other hand, it gives the reader an opportunity to understand the scope of the study. So based on the limitations of the study, you can provide the directions for future researchers. So these are the areas that I have covered with you all. Since I do not have any questions from your side, just two suggestions only. Like I thought I should wind up the session. Thank you very much for your participation. Have a pleasant evening.
Madam, can you stop sharing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll.
Very good evening to dear madam and to the esteemed guest and to the respected audience. So it's truly an honor for me to deliver the word of thanks on behalf of the Department of Accountancy and Finance, Faculty of Management Studies, Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, marking the successful conclusion of the 30th session of the Thesis Master Program 2025. So, to begin with, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to today's resource person, Professor T.C. Gamage, professor attached to the Department of Marketing Management, Faculty of Management Studies. So, dear madam, your session was truly thought provoking and deeply insightful, and we are grateful for the knowledge that you have been shared with us today throughout this session. And also, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude to the Faculty of Management Studies, which is led by Professor Athalasi Dhanapala, for providing unwavering support towards initiatives like this. And as well, particularly, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to Professor T.U.I. Piris, Head, Department of Accountancy and Finance, whose foresight and commitment have been instrumental in bringing this program so to this life. And as well, my special thanks goes to Professor Jantan Devasiri, the main coordinator of the program, for his continuous encouragement and invaluable guidance throughout the series. And a warm note of appreciation should goes to the dedicated organizing team, Ms. Shanika, Ms. Madhusha, Ms. Rashmi, Mr. Sajit, and Mr. Dakshina, whose hard work and attention to detail ensure the smooth flow of this session series. Last but not least, a sincere thank you to all participants, including academics, researchers, and students, for your enthusiastic engagement and presence, so which greatly contributed to the success of the today's session. So, we warmly invite you to join us again for the upcoming Thesis Mastery Program session that will be titled on the Building Trustworthy Research, Navigating Validity in Qualitative and Quantitative Approaches. And the session will be conducted by Professor T.U.I. Piris and Dr. P.K.S. Munasingha, which is attached to the Department of Accountancy Finance and as well from the Department of Tourism Management. So, with that note, thank you all once again for being here today with us throughout the session and as well wishing you a pleasant evening ahead.